You can't handle the family cabin, Grandma. Kevin's words hit me like a slap across my 72-year-old face. I stood there in my own kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, watching my eldest grandson lean against my counter like he owned it, which apparently he thought he did. Excuse me? I set the mug down slowly, the porcelain clicking against the formica that Richard and I had installed together in 1987, back when Kevin was still wetting his bed and calling me for stories about the brave little rabbit who lived in our woods. Come on, Grandma Eleanor, be realistic. He pulled out his phone, not even looking at me. The place is falling apart. The roof needs work, the dock's rotting, and when's the last time you even went up there? Dad says you haven't been since Grandpa died. Dad. My own son, Michael, sending his 28-year-old boy to handle his dirty work. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, heavier than the oatmeal I'd forced down for breakfast. Your grandfather and I built that cabin with our own hands, I said quietly. We carried every board up that mountain path because there wasn't a road then. That was 50 years ago. Kevin finally looked up from his screen, and I saw something in his eyes that made my breath catch. Impatience, calculation. The same look Richard used to get when he was figuring out a particularly tricky business deal, except this felt colder, hungrier. Look, I've got buyers interested. Cash offers. We can get you set up somewhere nice? Maybe one of those senior communities with the golf carts and activities. The word "we" hung in the air like smoke, as if this decision involved anyone but me. I haven't agreed to sell anything, I said. Kevin sighed, the way you'd sigh at a stubborn child. Grandma, I've been looking at your finances. Dad gave me access to help you manage things, remember? The property taxes alone are killing you, and the upkeep? You can't climb ladders to clean gutters. You can't haul firewood. You can't even drive up that mountain road in winter anymore. Each can't felt like a nail in my coffin. I gripped the edge of the counter, my arthritis flaring in my knuckles. When had I become so diminished in their eyes? When had I stopped being Eleanor Morrison, the woman who'd balanced the books for Richard's construction company for 30 years, who'd raised 4 children and buried her parents and her husband with equal grace? When had I become just Grandma? A fragile thing to be managed? The cabin means everything to me, I whispered. I know it does. His voice went gentle, patronizing. That's why we want to make sure you're taken care of. The money from the sale could set you up for life. No more worrying about heating bills or medical expenses. Isn't that what Grandpa would have wanted? It was. The knife, twisted with surgical precision, using Richard's memory against me. Don't. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Don't you dare tell me what your grandfather would have wanted. Kevin's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his face lit up with the kind of excitement that made my stomach turn. Actually, perfect timing. They want to come look at it this afternoon. The Hendersons. They're from California, looking for a mountain retreat. Cash buyers. No inspection contingencies. I said no. Grandma. He pocketed his phone and walked over to me, putting his hands on my shoulders like I was a confused child. You're not thinking clearly. This is a good thing, a smart thing. Trust me. Trust, another word that had lost all meaning. I stared into his face, Richard's nose, my daughter-in-law's stubborn chin, but something else entirely behind his eyes. When had he become this stranger? When had family become synonymous with disposal? I need time to think, I said. Time for what? To change your mind? To make this harder than it needs to be? Kevin glanced at his watch, expensive and silver. Look, they're driving up from Denver. That's a 4-hour round trip. It would be rude to cancel now. Rude. As if my feelings about my own property were simply a matter of etiquette. I suppose you've already given them the address, I said. Well, yeah. They're meeting me there at 2. Of course they were. I looked out my kitchen window at the view I'd woken up to for 45 years, the rolling hills that led up to the mountain where our cabin sat nestled among the pines. Where Richard had proposed on a blanket by the lake, where our children had learned to swim and fish and tell ghost stories around the fire pit, where I'd scattered his ashes last spring, watching them settle into the water like gray snow. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the hum of my old refrigerator and the distant sound of Mrs. Patterson's dog barking next door. Kevin shifted his weight, checking his phone again. Always checking that damn phone. I said slowly, I remember when your father was your age. He wanted to sell the cabin then too. Kevin's head snapped up. He did? Oh yes, right after you were born. Said we needed the money for your college fund. I traced the rim of my coffee cup with one finger. Richard was furious. They didn't speak for 6 months. I didn't know that. There's a lot you don't know. I stood up, my knees protesting but holding steady. How your grandfather left that cabin in a trust, with very specific instructions about what should happen to it. Kevin's face went pale. What kind of instructions? I almost smiled. Almost. The kind that require all living family members to agree before any sale can take place. Not just the trustees. But Dad said, your father says a lot of things. I walked to the window, watching a hawk circle over the meadow. He also assumes a lot of things, like assuming I'd just roll over and let my life's work be sold to the highest bidder. Kevin's phone rang. He looked at it like it might bite him, then answered with a shaky voice. Hello? Oh, hi, Mr. Henderson. Yes, we're still on for 2 o'clock. A pause. No problems at all. See you then. He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. Grandma, the Hendersons are already on their way. They've cleared their whole afternoon. If we cancel now, we're not canceling anything, I said. But you just said, I said the trust requires family agreement. I turned to face him fully. I didn't say I wouldn't give it. Kevin's relief was visible, his shoulders dropping as he exhaled. Poor boy. He had no idea what he'd walked into. None of them did. You're right about one thing, I continued. I can't handle the family cabin, not the way it deserves to be handled. Exactly. So we're good? You'll meet with the Hendersons? I picked up my purse from the counter, checking to make sure Richard's old leather wallet was still inside, the one with the safe deposit box key tucked behind his expired driver's license, the key they didn't know about. I'll be there, I said. Kevin beamed and kissed my cheek, already heading for the door. You're making the right choice, Grandma. Dad's going to be so relieved. And hey, with $2 million, you could buy yourself a nice little condo in Florida. Maybe one of those places with the pools and the shuffleboard courts. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, listening to the grandfather clock tick in the hallway. The same clock that had marked every important moment of my adult life. Richard's first heart attack, the children leaving for college, the phone call about the cancer. $2 million. It was more money than Richard and I had ever dreamed of having. More than enough to keep me comfortable for whatever years I had left. But comfort, I'd learned, wasn't the same as peace. And peace wasn't something you could buy. At 1:30, I drove up the mountain road one last time in my old Honda, taking the curves slowly but surely. The car knew the way by heart, as did I. Every pothole, every turn, every place where the aspen trees formed a tunnel of gold in the fall. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, weathered by mountain storms and the passage of time. But the bones were still strong. Richard had built things to last. The wraparound porch sagged a little on the left side, and yes, the dock needed new planks. But the foundation was solid stone, hand-laid by a man who believed in permanence. The Hendersons were already there, a sleek young couple in pristine hiking boots that had never seen a trail. Their eyes lit up as they walked the property, and I watched them through the window, seeing dollar signs dance in their vision. They pointed at the lake, at the mountain views, at the privacy of the location. They were already mentally decorating, already planning their mountain retreat. Kevin did all the talking, playing host in the home where he'd spent maybe 20 summers of his life. He pointed out the potential, the views, the investment opportunity. Never mentioned the Christmas mornings around the stone fireplace or the sound of children's laughter echoing off the lake, or the way Richard used to sing while he made pancakes on Sunday mornings. When they were ready to make their offer, Mr. Henderson approached me with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. His handshake was firm, practiced. His smile was warm and sincere. "Mrs. Morrison, this is exactly what we've been looking for. We're prepared to offer $2 million, cash, no contingencies. We can close in 30 days. I smiled as the $2 million buyer shook my hand, thinking about the documents hidden in Richard's safe deposit box and the conversation I was going to have with my family tonight. That evening, I called Michael. He answered on the first ring, which told me Kevin had already briefed him. My son's voice carried that careful tone he used when he thought he was, "Mom, Kevin told me about the meeting. I'm so proud of you for being practical about this." Practical. As if selling my life's memories was just good housekeeping. "We need to talk," I said. "Of course." Kevin said the Hendersons seemed serious. $2 million cash is incredible in this market. Dad would be amazed. There it was again, speaking for Richard, as if death had somehow transferred his voice to our children. "Michael." I kept my voice level. "I need you to come over tonight. And bring Lisa." A pause. "Mom, it's Wednesday. Lisa has her book club, and I've got that conference call with the Phoenix office. Can't this wait until the weekend?" "No," I said simply. "It can't." Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear him calculating, wondering if this was the beginning of some kind of mental decline. "Poor old mother, getting confused about business matters," he said finally. "We'll be there by 7. I hung up and walked to my bedroom, opening the closet where Richard's clothes still hung. Behind his good suit, the one he'd worn to our 50th anniversary dinner, was a small fireproof safe. I'd bought it myself 3 years ago after Richard's first small stroke. He'd recovered completely, but it had scared us both into getting our affairs in order. Inside the safe was Richard's will, of course, but also something else. Something Richard had made me promise to keep secret until after he was gone. A manila folder marked Cabin Trust. Original documents, 1978. I'd read through them a dozen times since his funeral, but tonight I spread them on my kitchen table like a general planning a campaign. Richard had been cleverer than any of us gave him credit for. Cleverer than even I had known. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Michael stood on my porch, holding Lisa's elbow like she might bolt, both of them wearing the patient expressions you'd use with a difficult elderly relative. Lisa clutched her purse like a shield. "Mom." Michael kissed my cheek, smelling of expensive cologne and impatience. "You look tired. Are you sleeping okay?" "I'm fine." I gestured them into the living room. "Sit down." Lisa perched on the edge of the sofa, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her purse clasp. "Eleanor, we're so glad you're being sensible about the cabin. Kevin was worried you might get sentimental." Sentimental. Another word that had become synonymous with foolish. "Coffee?" I asked. "We can't stay long," Michael said, checking his watch. "The same expensive brand as Kevin's. But we wanted to make sure you understood the sale process. I've already spoken to our attorney about expediting the paperwork." Our attorney. When had Richard's lawyer become theirs? I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in Richard's chair, the old recliner that still smelled faintly of his aftershave. Michael and Lisa exchanged a look, the kind couples share when they're humoring someone. "I found something interesting. Today," I said, placing the manila folder on the coffee table between us. Michael glanced at it. "What's that?" "The original trust documents for the cabin." "Mom, we've been through this. Dad set up the trust to avoid probate issues. Kevin and I are the trustees. We've been managing things since Dad died." "That's what you think." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "But you've been working from copies. Incomplete copies." Lisa leaned forward, squinting at the papers. "What? Do you mean incomplete?" "Your father was more careful than you realized." I spread the documents across the table. The cabin wasn't just put in trust. It was put in a very specific type of trust, one that requires unanimous consent from all beneficiaries before any major decisions can be made. Michael's face went pale. "All beneficiaries? Your father, myself, you, Kevin, Sarah, And David. And since your father is gone, his voting share passes to me. I ran my finger down the CO relevant paragraph, which means I have veto power over any sale. The silence that followed was broken only by the grandfather clock chiming 7:30. Lisa's nail drumming had stopped. Michael was reading over the documents with the intensity of a man watching his plans crumble. This doesn't make sense, he said finally. Our lawyer never mentioned. Your lawyer never saw these documents. I pulled out another sheet. This is a letter of instruction your father left with our bank. The complete trust documents were sealed in our safe deposit box, with instructions to release them only to me and only after his death. Why? Lisa's voice had gone sharp. Why would he hide this from his own children? I looked at her for a long moment. Lisa, who'd married my son 15 years ago and immediately started making suggestions about how we could optimize our assets. Lisa, who'd never missed an opportunity to mention how much the cabin was worth, how much it cost to maintain, how rarely we used it anymore. Because he knew, I said simply. Knew what? Michael demanded. That the moment he was gone, you'd want to sell it. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Because that's what they were. Michael stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Mom, that's not fair. We're thinking about your future, about making sure you're taken care of. By selling the one place on earth that still feels like home? It's just a building, Lisa said. A very expensive building that sits empty most of the year. I felt something shift inside me, a tectonic plate of patience finally giving way. I didn't mean just a building where your husband learned to fish, where Kevin took his first steps, where Sarah had her sweet 16th birthday party because she wanted to be somewhere special with the family. My voice was rising, and I didn't care. Just a building where I held your father's hand while he died, because that's where he wanted to take his last breath. Lisa flinched. Michael stopped pacing. Mom, he said quietly, we didn't know that's where. You never told us. You never asked. I gathered the documents back into the folder. You just assumed I was too old to handle my own affairs, assumed I'd be grateful to have the burden lifted, assumed wrong. Michael sat back down, suddenly looking older than his 46 years. So what happens now? You're saying we can't sell? I'm saying you can't sell without my permission, and you won't give it. I stood up, feeling steadier than I had in months. Not to the Hendersons, then to who? Lisa asked. Mom, I hate to be blunt, but you can't afford to keep that place. The property taxes alone are $12,000 a year. The insurance, the maintenance, it's bleeding money. You let me worry about the money. How? Michael's voice carried an edge of desperation. Mom, I've seen your bank statements. You're living on Dad's pension and Social Security. You drive a 15-year-old Honda and buy generic groceries. Where exactly are you going to find money for cabin upkeep? I walked to the window, looking out at the mountain silhouette against the darkening sky. They thought they knew everything about my finances. They thought Richard had told them everything about our arrangements. They were wrong about that too. Your father left more than you know, I said. What do you mean? Lisa had gone very still. The will was read. Everything was accounted for. The will, yes, but not everything was in the will. I turned back to face them, and something in my expression must have warned them, because they both sat forward. What are you talking about, Mom? Michael's voice was careful now, controlled. I'm talking about the investment account your father never told you about. The one he opened in 1985 when the construction business started really taking off. I smiled, remembering Richard's pride when he'd shown me the first statement. He called it our cabin fund, money set aside specifically for maintaining the property, no matter what happened to us. Michael's face had gone completely white. How much money? Enough. Mom, how much? I let the silence stretch, watching my son and daughter-in-law absorb the reality that their assumptions about my helplessness had been built on incomplete information. Enough to keep the cabin running for the rest of my life, I said finally. And maybe longer. Lisa stood up abruptly, her purse clutching, forgotten. I need some air. She walked out onto the porch, leaving Michael and me alone. Through the window, I could see her on her phone, pacing back and forth across the wooden boards. "Mom," Michael said quietly, "why didn't you tell us about this account before?" "Because your father made me promise to keep it secret until I needed it." I sat back down across from him. He said if our children knew we had money set aside, they'd find ways to justify spending it on other things. He said the cabin was the one thing that could never be replaced, so it should be the one thing that was protected. Michael rubbed his forehead with both hands. "Jesus, Mom, do you have any idea what you've put us through? Kevin's been losing sleep over your finances. I've been looking into second mortgages to help you out." "I didn't ask for help." "You didn't have to ask. You're our mother." For the first time all evening, his voice carried genuine emotion instead of calculation. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "I know you think you're taking care of me," I said, "but I don't need to be taken care of. Not yet." Lisa came back inside, her face flushed and angry. "I just called Kevin. He's already told the Hendersons we'd have an answer by Friday." "Then you'd better call him back," I said, "and tell him the answer is no." Lisa's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous crimson. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious. About anything in my life." She turned to Michael, her voice rising to a pitch that would have made dogs howl. "Do something. Talk to her. She's not thinking clearly." Michael looked like a man caught between two avalanches. "Mom, maybe we should take some time to—" "Time for what?" Lisa spun back to me. "Eleanor, that couple drove 4 hours to see the property. They've already made an offer. Kevin gave them expectations without consulting me." I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 72 years but refusing to show it. "Last I checked, I'm still the homeowner." "Technically, the trust is the homeowner," Lisa shot back, "and Michael and Kevin are the trustees." I walked to the kitchen, hearing them follow behind me like confused children. "You want to play technical? Let's play technical." I pulled out another document from the folder, one I'd saved for exactly this moment. Richard always said timing was everything in business. In family, apparently, it was everything too. "This," I said, placing the paper on the kitchen table, "is an amendment to the trust agreement, dated 6 months before your father died." Michael leaned over to read it, his lips moving silently as he worked through the legal language. I watched his face change as understanding dawned. "It says," he swallowed hard, "it says you have the right to replace trustees if they act against the stated purpose of the trust, which is to preserve the family cabin as a gathering place for current and future generations of the Morrison family." His voice was barely a whisper. Lisa snatched the document from his hands. "This is ridiculous. People change their minds. Circumstances change. You can't be bound by some sentimental promise forever." "Watch me." The words came out colder than I'd intended, but I didn't apologize. 47 years of marriage had taught me when to be soft and when to be steel. This moment called for steel. My phone rang. Kevin's name lit up the screen. "That'll be for you," I said to Lisa. She answered with the brittle cheerfulness of someone barely containing rage. "Hi, honey. Yes, she did. No, I don't know why. Can you just— Kevin, please don't yell at me." She handed me the phone. "He wants to talk to you." "Grandma?" Kevin's voice was strained. "What's going on? Lisa said you're backing out?" "I'm not backing out of anything, sweetie. I never backed in." "But you shook hands with Mr. Henderson. You smiled. He thinks he's buying the cabin." I could hear the panic in his voice. Poor boy. He'd probably already spent his commission in his head. "Then you'd better call him and explain the misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding? You agreed to sell." "I agreed to meet with them. I never agreed to sell anything." I moved to the window, watching Mrs. Patterson's porch light flicker on across the street. "Kevin, how much did you tell them you'd get for arranging this sale?" Silence. "Kevin, it's standard real estate practice, a finder's fee." "How much?" 3%, $60,000. No wonder he'd been so eager to arrange the viewing. "I see." I kept my voice gentle. And did you tell them you were the listing agent, or did you tell them you were the grandson helping his elderly grandmother with a difficult decision? Another silence, longer this time. Kevin, I said quietly, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Did you really believe selling the cabin was in my best interest? Or were you thinking about $60,000? I heard him start to cry. Not the angry tears of a thwarted adult, but the guilty sobs of a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Grandma. The money was so much, and Sarah's wedding is coming up, and the down payment on the house. Oh, honey. My heart broke a little. Why didn't you just ask for help? Because you don't have any money, because you clip coupons and drive that old car and never buy anything for yourself. Because Dad said you were barely getting by. I looked at Michael, who had the grace to look ashamed. Your father doesn't know everything about my finances. But Kevin does, Lisa interjected. Michael gave him access to your accounts to help manage your expenses. To my checking account, I corrected. Not to everything. Kevin was still on the phone, his breathing ragged. Grandma, what do I tell? The Hendersons? They're staying at the Four Seasons in Denver tonight. They're planning to drive back up tomorrow with their contractor. Tell them the truth, that the property isn't for sale. They're going to be furious. They might sue for breach of contract. Let them try. I smiled, remembering Richard's advice about bullies. Kevin, do you know what a verbal contract requires to be enforceable? Agreement? Authority. The person making the agreement has to have the legal authority to make it. I let that sink in. You never had authority to sell my cabin, so there's no contract to breach. I heard him take a shaky breath. I've really screwed this up, haven't I? Yes, I said gently, but not beyond repair. Call the Hendersons tonight, apologize, explain that you overstepped your authority, offer to reimburse their travel expenses. I don't have money for that. I do. The words hung in the air for a moment. Kevin, I'm going to wire $5,000 to your account tomorrow morning. You'll use it to make this right with the Hendersons, and whatever's left over can help with Sarah's wedding. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I thought we'd been disconnected. Kevin? Why? His voice was thick with confusion. Why would you help me after what I did? Because you're my grandson. Because you made a mistake, not a crime. And because... I paused, looking at Michael and Lisa, who were listening to every word. Because family forgives. That's what family does. After I hung up, the kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on Maple Street. Lisa was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. $5,000, she said finally. Just like that? Eleanor, I don't understand you at all. She sat down heavily in one of my kitchen chairs. You have money, real money, but you live like a church mouse. You let us worry about your finances. Let us plan ways to help you. Let Kevin think he was saving you from poverty. Why? It was a fair question. I poured myself another cup of coffee, using the time to think about the answer. Because, I said finally, the moment you have money, everyone around you starts having opinions about how you should spend it. Michael winced. Mom? It's true. I sat down across from Lisa. Richard learned that lesson early. When his construction business started doing well, suddenly everyone was our best friend. Everyone had investment advice, charity requests, business opportunities that were sure things. I sipped my coffee. We learned to keep our own counsel. But we're your family, Lisa protested. Yes, you are. I met her eyes directly. And you just spent the last 3 hours trying to convince me to sell the one place on earth that still feels like home because you thought it would be practical. The words landed like physical blows. Lisa's face crumpled. I thought we were helping, she whispered. I know you did. I reached across the table and touched her hand. That's the tragedy of it. Michael stood up abruptly, walking to the sink and staring out at the darkness. So what happens now, Mom? You keep the cabin, we keep pretending you need our help managing your life, and everyone goes back to their corners? No. I stood up too, feeling something click into place in my chest. Now we stopped pretending altogether. I walked to my purse and pulled out a business card that had been sitting there for 3 weeks, ever since Richard's lawyer had given it to me. Now I call the number your father left me, the number for the estate planning attorney who's going to help me restructure everything. Restructure how? Lisa asked. I smiled, thinking about the conversation I'd been putting off since Richard's funeral. The conversation about the cabin trust, about the investment accounts, about the life insurance policy that had paid out more than my children knew, and about the careful plans Richard and I had made for exactly this situation. That, I said, tucking the card back into my purse, is something you'll find out tomorrow. I'm calling a family meeting for 10 o'clock. Everyone needs to be here. Michael, Lisa, Kevin, Sarah, David, no exceptions. Mom, David lives in Seattle, Michael protested. Sarah's in Phoenix. Then they'd better book flights tonight. I walked them to the door, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in months. Because tomorrow, we're going to discuss the real reason your father put the cabin in trust, and it wasn't to avoid probate. I watched them drive away, their taillights disappearing into the Colorado darkness. Then I went to my bedroom and pulled out the locked metal box that had been sitting unopened in my closet since Richard's funeral. Inside was a letter addressed to me in his careful handwriting. I'd been too afraid to read it until now, too afraid of what it might say, what responsibilities it might place on my shoulders. But tonight, with my family's betrayal still fresh and my own hidden strength finally revealed, I was ready. The letter was short, only 3 paragraphs. But by the time I finished reading it, I understood everything. The trust, the investment accounts, the careful secrecy. Richard hadn't just been protecting the cabin. He'd been protecting me, and preparing me for a moment exactly like this one. Tomorrow, I would call the lawyer. Tomorrow, I would reveal the full scope of what Richard had left behind. Tomorrow, I would show my family what happened when you underestimated Eleanor Morrison. But tonight, I sat in his chair and smiled at the mountain darkness, holding the letter that would change everything. The next morning, I woke before dawn and made Richard's famous blueberry pancakes. It seemed like the right thing to do for what might be our last family breakfast in this house. I used his cast-iron skillet, the one his mother had given us as a wedding present, and I sang while I cooked the way he used to. An old Patsy Cline song about crazy dreams and broken hearts. By 9:30, my kitchen smelled like butter and vanilla and forgiveness. By 9:45, the coffee was ready and the table was set for 7. I'd even used the good china, the Spode pattern we'd gotten for our 25th anniversary and only brought out for Christmas and Easter. Today felt like both. Sarah arrived first, looking harried and expensive in her Phoenix Realtor blazer. She hugged me tight, smelling of airplane air and worry. Mom, what's this about? Michael's text scared me half to death. Something about trust documents and family meetings? Sit down, sweetheart. Have some coffee. David came next, his Seattle software engineer pallor more pronounced than usual. He'd clearly taken the red eye, judging by the rumpled clothes and stubble. Grandma. He kissed my cheek, then looked around the kitchen with the careful attention of someone cataloging details for a last time. Dad said you might be selling the cabin? We'll see. Michael and Lisa arrived together, both wearing the grim expressions of people expecting bad news. Kevin shuffled in behind them, looking like a man walking to his own execution. I called the Hendersons, he announced to the room. Explained everything. They were not happy. But they accepted the travel reimbursement? I asked. Yeah. Thank you for that, Grandma. I wired it back this morning. He slumped into a chair. I also called the real estate board to report myself for the conflict of interest. They're probably going to suspend my license. Probably, I agreed. But not permanently. And Kevin? Next time you need money, ask family first. We take care of our own. The room fell silent. Everyone was looking at me with varying degrees of confusion, hope, and suspicion. I poured coffee all around and served the pancakes, watching my family eat the same breakfast they'd eaten 1,000 times in this kitchen. These taste exactly like Grandpa's, Sarah said softly. They should. Same recipe, same skillet, same love. I sat down at the head of the table in Richard's spot. Which brings me to why you're all here. I pulled out the manila folder again, along with Richard's letter and a new document that had arrived by courier an hour ago. Your father left me instructions, I began. Very specific instructions about what to do if anyone in the family ever tried to force a sale of the cabin. Michael set down his fork. Mom, we weren't trying to force anything. We were trying to help. Were you? I opened Richard's letter and read the first paragraph aloud. Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means someone in the family has forgotten what the cabin represents. They've started seeing dollar signs instead of memories. It means it's time to remind them who we are and where we came from. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Richard wrote that? 3 months before. He died. I continued reading. The cabin was never about the building, sweetheart. It was about family, about having a place where money doesn't matter, where success is measured in s'mores and sunset conversations. If they're trying to sell it, they've lost sight of what's important. Show them the rest. I set the letter down and opened the new document. This arrived this morning from Jameson Worth and Associates. They've been managing certain aspects of your father's estate that weren't disclosed in the original will reading. David leaned forward, his programmer's brain already working through possibilities. What kind of aspects? The kind that change everything. I spread the document across the table. Your father didn't just leave the cabin in trust. He left enough money to maintain it in perpetuity. Not just for my lifetime. Forever. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the kitchen clock ticking above the stove. How much money? Sarah whispered. Enough to pay property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and utilities for the next 100 years. I met each of their eyes in turn, plus enough to establish a family foundation dedicated to preserving mountain wilderness areas in Colorado. Kevin's fork clattered to his plate. A foundation? The Morrison Family Environmental Foundation. Your father spent 5 years planning it before his death. I pulled out another set of documents. He was going to announce it at our 50th anniversary party, but the cancer moved too fast. Michael was reading over the papers, his face cycling through disbelief, shock, and something that might have been awe. Mom, this endowment is worth $12 million. Lisa made a sound like she was choking on her coffee. 12 million? Your father was a very good businessman, better than any of us realized. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountain view that had grounded me for 45 years. He invested early in tech companies, bought land before the ski resorts expanded, made careful choices for 30 years. But he never forgot where he came from. Sarah was crying quietly, tears dropping onto her untouched pancakes. Why didn't he tell us? Because he wanted to see what kind of people you'd become on your own. I turned back to face them. He wanted to know if you'd choose family over money, or money over family. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Because that's what they were. We failed, David said quietly, didn't we? You made mistakes, I corrected. There's a difference. I sat back down and pulled out the final document from the folder. Which is why your father left one more set of instructions. Michael looked like a man bracing for impact. What instructions? That if the family ever came together again, if they remembered what was truly important, the foundation would be activated. I smiled, feeling Richard's presence in the room as strongly, as if he were sitting beside me. But only if they came together willingly, only if they chose family. And if they don't? Lisa asked. Then the money goes to the Colorado Wilderness Foundation. The cabin becomes a nature preserve, and the Morrison family legacy becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when greed matters more than love. Kevin was staring at the papers like they might disappear if he blinked. Grandma, are you saying that if we all agree to keep the cabin, we get to be part of a $12 million foundation? I'm saying more than that. I opened the final document, the one the lawyer had explained to me in careful detail. I'm saying you get to choose who you want to be, as individuals and as a family. I read directly from the page. The Morrison Family Environmental Foundation will be governed by a board consisting of all living family members. Each member will receive an annual stipend for their board service, and each will have equal voting rights on how the foundation's resources are used. How much is the stipend? Sarah asked, her realtor instincts kicking in. Enough. I met her eyes. Enough to pay for weddings, down payments, college educations, emergencies. Enough to take care of each other without anyone having to choose between family and financial security. David was doing calculations in his head. With proper investment management, a $12 million endowment could generate enough annual income to change lives. I finished. Your father ran the numbers a dozen times. Done right, this foundation could support our family for generations while also doing real good in the world. Michael finally spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. What do we have to do? Sign an agreement that the cabin will never be sold, that it will remain in family hands, maintained by foundation funds, available to any Morrison family member who wants to use it. I paused. And that foundation decisions will be made by consensus, not by majority vote. Everyone has to agree, or nothing happens. That's impossible, Lisa protested. You'll never get a big family to agree on everything. Maybe not, I shrugged. In which case, the Colorado Wilderness Foundation gets a very nice donation, and we all go back to our separate lives. I stood up and began clearing the breakfast dishes, giving them time to absorb what I'd told them. Through the kitchen window, I could see a hawk circling over the meadow, riding the thermal currents. With patient grace. I need to know by 5 o'clock today, I said, my back to them as I rinsed plates in the sink. The lawyer is waiting for our decision. And if we say yes? Kevin asked. If we all sign the agreement? I turned around, drying my hands on the dish towel Richard had bought me for Mother's Day 3 years ago. It was faded now, but still soft. Then tomorrow morning, we drive up to the cabin together, all of us, and we start figuring out how to be a family again. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the sound of running water and the distant buzz of Mrs. Patterson's lawnmower. My children and grandchildren sat around the table, staring at documents that would change their lives, wrestling with a choice between security and legacy. Finally, Sarah spoke. Can we have some time to think about it? Maybe talk it over as a group? Of course. I hung up the dish towel and picked up Richard's letter, folding it carefully. I'll be in the garden if you need me. Take all the time you want. As I walked outside, I heard the quiet murmur of family conversation beginning behind me. Voices I'd known since birth, wrestling with the gift Richard had left them. The gift of choosing who they wanted to be. I spent an hour in my garden, deadheading roses and pretending not to listen to the heated conversation drifting through my open kitchen window. The voices rose and fell like a tide. Sarah's practical questions about tax implications. David's concerns about family, governance structures. Lisa's repeated assertions that this is too good to be true. Michael trying to moderate between competing viewpoints. Kevin mostly silent, probably still processing his own guilt. At 11:30, the conversation moved to the living room. I could no longer make out individual words, just the rhythm of family debate. The same rhythm I'd heard for 50 years, passionate, messy, ultimately loving. I was transplanting seedlings when Sarah found me. Mom? She knelt, beside me in the dirt, her expensive blazer forgotten. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did Dad really plan all this? The foundation, the timing, the choice we'd have to make? I sat back on my heels, studying my daughter's face. Sarah had always been the skeptical one, the child who needed proof before believing in magic. Your father spent 2 years working with that law firm, I said. Every detail was planned. He even wrote individual letters for each of you, to be opened if you choose the foundation. Letters saying what? I don't know. He sealed them himself. I brushed dirt from my hands. But knowing your father, probably something about how proud he is of the people you've become. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I haven't become much. Divorced, no kids, living in a condo I can barely afford, selling houses to pay for a lifestyle I don't even enjoy anymore. You became independent, strong, someone who fights for what she believes in. I touched her cheek, gently. That's not nothing, sweetheart. The foundation money could change everything for me, she whispered. I could quit the job I hate, maybe go back to school for environmental law I always wanted. Money doesn't change people, Sarah. It just reveals who they already are. She was quiet for a moment, watching me work. What if we can't make it work? What if we sign the agreement and then fight about every decision? Then you'll fight as a family, in a place that means something. With stakes that matter. I planted another seedling, pressing the soil firmly around its roots. That's better than fighting about nothing in places that don't matter. David appeared at the garden gate, looking uncertain. Mind if I join you? Pull up some dirt, I said. He sat cross-legged beside us, his programmer's hands awkward with the plants, but trying anyway. I've been thinking about what Grandpa used to say about the cabin. What's that? That it wasn't about escaping from real life. It was about remembering what real life was supposed to feel like. David carefully picked up a seedling, examining its tiny root system. I think I forgot that somewhere along the way. We all did, Sarah said softly. That's why we're here. Kevin's having a meltdown in there, David continued. He keeps saying he doesn't deserve to be part of the foundation after what he tried to do. I thought about my grandson, barely 30 years old and already carrying the weight of financial pressure that had crushed stronger men. What do you think? I think Grandpa planned for that too. I think he knew one of us would eventually try to sell, and he wanted to see if the rest of us would choose forgiveness or punishment. Smart boy. Richard would have been proud. And what are you choosing? I asked. David was quiet for a long moment, focused on placing his seedling in the prepared hole. I'm choosing to believe that family means giving each other second chances. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. That's what Mom did yesterday. When she could have let Kevin twist in the wind, she threw him a lifeline instead. Your grandfather always said forgiveness was a muscle, I told them. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. We worked in companionable silence for a while. 3 generations of Morrison women and 1 honorary member, getting our hands dirty with the business of growing things. Through the window, I could hear Michael's voice, patient and steady, working through the legal language with Lisa. At noon, Kevin finally emerged from the house. He looked like he'd been crying, but his shoulders were straighter than they'd been in days. Grandma, can I talk to you? Of course, honey. He knelt beside me, ignoring the dirt that immediately soaked through his khakis. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about asking family for help instead of trying to solve everything myself. And I realized I've been doing everything backwards. He picked up a hand trowel, turning it over in his fingers. I've been so focused on proving I could handle things alone that I forgot the point of having a family. Which is? Not having to handle things alone. I nodded. Your grandfather struggled with that too. Independence is important, but isolation isn't the same thing as strength. If the family votes yes on the foundation, Kevin said carefully, I want to be the one who manages the cabin maintenance. Not for money. I know there's a stipend, but I don't want it. I want to do it because it's right, because it's my way of making up for almost selling our history to strangers. Kevin, Sarah started to protest. No, let me finish. He looked at each of us in turn. I'm also going to use my real estate license to help the foundation acquire land for preservation. If I'm going to be in the business of buying and selling property, I want it to be property that matters. David grinned. Grandpa would love that irony. Using real estate to save the environment instead of destroying it. Think you can make a living doing that kind of work? I asked Kevin. I don't know. But I'd rather make less money doing something meaningful than more money doing something that makes me hate myself. Smart boy, too. They all were, underneath the financial pressure and social expectations that had been crushing their spirits. Lisa appeared in the garden doorway, looking uncertain. Eleanor, could we talk? Just the 2 of us? Sarah and David exchanged glances, then stood up, brushing dirt from their clothes. We'll go help Dad with the legal review, Sarah said. Kevin started to follow them, but I caught his arm. Stay. Lisa's family, too. Lisa approached cautiously, like she was walking through a minefield, which, in a way, she was. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. Several apologies, actually. Do you? Yes. She sat down heavily on my garden bench, her perfect manicure looking out of place against the weathered wood. I've been treating you like an obstacle instead of a person, like a problem to be solved instead of a mother-in-law to be respected. I continued planting, giving her space to work through whatever she needed to say. The truth is, I've been jealous of the cabin for 15 years, she continued. Jealous of the way Michael's face lights up when he talks about it. Jealous of the memories I wasn't part of. Jealous that there was this whole piece of his life that existed before me and would exist after me. And now I'm wondering if maybe I was fighting the wrong battle. Lisa's voice was quiet, thoughtful. Maybe instead of trying to eliminate the competition, I should have been trying to become part of it. Kevin looked up from the seedling he was planting. It's not too late for that, isn't it? Lisa's laugh was bitter. I'm the evil daughter-in-law who tried to steal the family legacy. I'm not exactly positioned for a redemption arc. Maybe not, I agreed. But you're positioned for something better. Which is? I set down my trowel and really looked at her. Lisa was 42 years old, successful in her own right, beautiful and intelligent, and deeply insecure about her place in our family. She'd married my son when she was 27, young enough to feel threatened by his established relationships, but old enough to be proud about expressing that fear. You're positioned to help us figure out how to welcome new people into old traditions, I said. The foundation isn't just about the family we have now, it's about the family we'll become. Someday Kevin will marry someone. Sarah might adopt children. David will probably find love eventually. Those people will need to feel welcome too. Lisa's eyes widened slightly. You want me to help design inclusion policies? I want you to help us avoid the mistakes we made with you. I reached over and touched her hand. You felt like an outsider because we treated you like one. That was our failure, not yours. The silence that followed was broken by Kevin clearing his throat. Actually, there's something I should mention about the whole marriage thing. Lisa and I both looked at him. I've been seeing someone for about 6 months now. He blushed furiously. Her name is Maria. She's a teacher. And if this foundation thing works out, if we all decide to be a real family again, I'd like to bring her to the cabin sometime. Kevin Morrison, I said sternly. Are you telling me you've been hiding a girlfriend from your grandmother? Well, yeah, but in my defense, we've all been hiding things from each other lately. Lisa laughed, a real laugh this time. He's got a point. Bring her to the cabin, I said. Bring her to family dinners. Bring her here to meet me properly. I stood up, dusting dirt from my knees. And Kevin? Next time you have news worth sharing, share it. Good news shouldn't be a secret. Yes, ma'am. At 1 o'clock, Michael called us all back inside. The legal documents were spread across my dining room table like battle plans, marked with notes and questions in David's careful handwriting. We've been through everything twice, Michael announced. The foundation structure is solid. The funding is real. The legal protections are comprehensive. He paused, looking around at his family. The question is whether we trust each other enough to make this work. And, I asked, we'd like to put it to a vote. I looked around the room at these people I'd loved and worried about and been disappointed by and forgiven for decades. All in favor? One by one, hands went up. Sarah first, then David, then Kevin. Michael and Lisa raised their hands together, fingers intertwined. Motion carried, I said quietly. Unanimously. The room erupted in nervous laughter, hugs, and the kind of chaotic celebration that had marked every important moment in Morrison family history. But underneath the excitement, I could feel something else. The weight of choice, the responsibility of stewardship, the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could be better than we'd been. As the afternoon light slanted through my windows, I watched my family begin the hard work of becoming a family again. Tomorrow, we would drive up the mountain together. Tomorrow, we would begin to build something new from the foundation Richard had left us. But tonight, we had one more surprise waiting. The next morning, we drove up the mountain in a convoy of cars that looked like a funeral procession in reverse, mourners coming back to life. I rode with Sarah in her rental car, watching the familiar curves of the mountain road unfold like pages in a beloved book. Behind us, Michael and Lisa followed in their Lexus. Kevin brought up the rear in his Honda, and I could see a passenger in his front seat, a young woman with dark hair who kept gesturing animatedly as they talked. "He brought her," Sarah murmured, following my gaze in the rearview mirror. "Good. Aren't you nervous? Meeting Kevin's girlfriend for the first time at the cabin?" I thought about that. The cabin has seen a lot of first meetings over the years. First girlfriends, first fiancés, first babies. It's good at making people feel welcome. The road opened onto the final stretch, and there it was. Our cabin nestled among the pines, like it had been waiting patiently for our return. The morning light caught the lake's surface, turning it into a mirror that reflected clouds and possibilities. "It looks smaller than I remembered," Sarah said softly. "Things always do when you come back as an adult." We parked in the gravel clearing that Richard had carved out of the forest 30 years ago. Kevin emerged from his car first, then helped his passenger out with the careful attention of a man in love. She was prettier than I'd expected, with kind eyes and laugh lines that suggested she smiled more than she worried. "Grandma," Kevin said, his voice nervous but determined. "I'd like you to meet Maria Gonzalez." She stepped forward with confidence, offering her hand. "Mrs. Morrison, Kevin has told me so much about you in this place. Thank you for including me today. Call me Eleanor, and thank you for coming." I studied her face, looking for the signs Richard had taught me to recognize. Sincerity, kindness, the capacity for both joy and sorrow. "Kevin tells me you're a teacher, 5th grade, and you're the woman who built a foundation in one day and saved a family in the process." I liked her immediately. The cabin smelled like pine needles and dust, and 47 years of memories. Lisa wrinkled her nose at the musty air, but Maria walked through the rooms like she was exploring a museum, touching things gently and asking quiet questions about the photos on the mantel. "This is where Michael learned to tie fishing flies," I told her, pointing to Richard's old desk by the window. "And that rocking chair is where I nursed all 4 babies during summer visits. It must be hard," she said quietly, "having so many memories in one place. It would be harder having them nowhere." We spent the morning opening windows, airing out rooms, and making lists of what needed to be repaired or replaced. David found a family of mice in the kitchen pantry and declared war with the enthusiasm of someone who'd missed having concrete problems to solve. Lisa surprised everyone by knowing how to restart the ancient water heater, a skill she'd apparently learned during her own childhood summers at a family cottage in Michigan. At noon, Michael and Kevin drove into town for supplies while the rest of us sat on the porch, drinking coffee from the chipped mugs that had been in the cabin since the Carter administration. "Mom," Sarah said suddenly, "there's something I need to tell you." "Oh?" "I've been thinking about what Dad wrote in my letter, the one I'm supposed to get if we choose the foundation. And I'm scared to read it." She stared out. At the lake, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug like an anchor. "What if it says he's disappointed in me? What if it talks about the grandchildren I never gave him, or the marriage I couldn't save, or the fact that I'm 44 years old and still don't know what I want to be when I grow up?" Maria spoke up quietly. "My father died when I was 32. I found a letter he'd written to me in his desk drawer, something he'd apparently been working on for years." "What did it say?" Sarah asked. "That he was proud of me for becoming myself instead of becoming what other people wanted me to be." Maria's voice was gentle. "That disappointment wasn't possible when love was unconditional." "Your father sounds like a wise man," I said. "He was, but he was also just a father who loved his daughter." She looked at Sarah meaningfully. "The way your father loved you." The men returned with enough groceries to feed an army and the cheerful chaos that came with unpacking supplies in a kitchen designed for simpler times. Maria jumped in without being asked, finding her way around the cabin's quirks with the adaptability of someone who'd grown up making herself useful. That evening, after a dinner of grilled trout that Kevin had caught in the lake and vegetables from my own garden that we'd brought up in coolers, I gathered my family in the living room. "It's time," I announced, pulling out a wooden box I'd retrieved from the cabin's bedroom closet. "Time for what?" David asked. Time for your father's letters. The box was made of pine from trees that had grown on our property, crafted by Richard during one of the long winter evenings when arthritis kept him from outdoor work, but his hands still needed something to do. Inside were 5 sealed envelopes, each marked with a name in his careful handwriting. He wrote these over the course of 2 years, I explained. 1 for each of you and 1 for me. To be opened only if you chose to keep the cabin and accept the foundation. I handed them out like Christmas presents, watching my children and grandchildren hold pieces of their father and grandfather in their hands. Do we read them aloud? Michael asked. That's up to you. Your father didn't specify. Sarah opened hers first, her hands shaking slightly as she unfolded the pages. Her eyes moved across the lines, and I watched her face change. Surprise, then relief, then tears that looked like joy instead of sadness. He says, she started, then stopped, gathering herself. He says he's proud that I chose authenticity over approval. That divorce took courage, not failure. That the grandchildren he wanted most were the ones I chose to nurture through teaching instead of the ones I felt obligated to produce through biology. She looked up at us through her tears. He knew about the students I mentor, the kids from broken homes who need extra attention. He says those are his grandchildren too, in all the ways that matter. Kevin opened his. Next, scanning quickly with the hunger of someone who'd been starving for approval. His face crumpled with relief. He says the cabin was never about money, but that money without purpose is just another form of poverty. Kevin's voice was thick. He says he's proud that I'm learning the difference between being financially successful and being genuinely valuable. David's letter was shorter, but it made him laugh out loud. He says he's glad I moved to Seattle because someone in the family needed to understand technology, and now the foundation can use modern tools to do ancient work. David shook his head in amazement. How did he know I'd want to help? Michael's letter was the longest, and he read it silently, his lips moving occasionally as he worked through particularly emotional passages. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes that held a lifetime of understanding. He says he knows I felt caught in the middle, trying to take care of everyone else while taking care of myself. Michael's voice was steady, but full. He says that's what good leaders do, and that's why the foundation needs me to help guide it. Not because I'm the oldest, but because I care about everyone's well-being. Maria had been sitting quietly beside Kevin, trying to be invisible during this intimate family moment. But Kevin reached for her hand and pulled her closer. You're part of this now too, he said simply. Kevin, I couldn't. Yes, you could, I interrupted. Family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. You chose to be here today, in this place that means everything to us. That makes you family. As the evening wound down and we prepared to return to the valley, I opened my own letter. Richard's words were simple and direct, the way he'd always been when something mattered. Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means you did what I knew you'd do. You reminded our family who they are and where they come from. You showed them that love is stronger than greed and that legacy is more valuable than money. I'm proud of you for fighting for us, even when it would have been easier to let them sell. The foundation is my gift to the family, but you are my gift to the future. Take care of them, sweetheart. And take care of yourself. There's one more surprise waiting for you at home. Check the garage. Love always, Richard. I folded the letter carefully, smiling at the mystery he'd left for me to discover. Even in death, Richard Morrison was still full of surprises. As we locked up the cabin and prepared to drive back down the mountain, I watched my family load into their cars with the easy familiarity of people who belonged together. Kevin helped Maria into his passenger seat, already planning when they'd return. Sarah and David were debating foundation priorities, their voices animated with purpose. Michael and Lisa held hands as they walked to their car, looking like a couple who'd remembered why they fell in love. The convoy of cars wound down the mountain, rode as the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility. In my rearview mirror, I could see the cabin growing smaller in the distance, but it didn't feel like leaving. It felt like coming home. 3 months later, I stood in my garage at 6 in the morning, staring at Richard's final gift. It had taken me that long to work up the courage to investigate his cryptic message about checking the garage. For weeks after our family meeting, I'd been too busy with lawyers and foundation paperwork and the delicious chaos of watching my family learn to work together again. But this morning, with the first frost of autumn painting my windows and the mountain peaks visible in the crystal-clear air, I finally pulled the tarp off the object Richard had hidden behind his workbench. It was a 1967 Mustang convertible, cherry red with white racing stripes, fully restored to showroom perfection. Taped to the windshield was an envelope with my name on it, written in Richard's unmistakable handwriting. Inside was a title in my name, dated 3 days before his death, and a note that made me laugh out loud in my empty garage. Eleanor, remember our first date? You said someday you'd own a car that could outrun your problems. Well, sweetheart, you just did. The problems are in the rearview mirror now. Time to see what's ahead. Love, your devoted mechanic, Richard. I remembered that first date like it was yesterday. Richard Morrison, 24 years old and cocky as hell, picking me up in his beat-up truck for a drive through the mountains. I'd been 21, fresh out of college, and foolish enough to say that someday I wanted a car that could take me anywhere I wanted to go. 51 years later, he'd finally bought me that car. I found the keys in the ignition along with one more surprise. The registration showed the car had been in Richard's name for 15 years. He'd been planning this moment for longer than I could fathom, working on the restoration in his spare time, hiding it behind a tarp I'd never thought to lift. The engine turned over on the first try, purring like a contented cat. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, breathing in the smell of leather and possibility, then backed out of the garage and pointed the Mustang toward the mountain road. At 72 years old, I drove faster than I had in decades. The Morrison Family Environmental Foundation was officially launched on a Tuesday in November, with a press conference held at the cabin and attended by environmental groups, local politicians, and 3 generations of my family. Kevin had quit his old real estate job and become the foundation's land acquisition specialist, using his industry knowledge to identify properties worth preserving before developers could claim them. In 3 months, he'd already negotiated the purchase of 2 critical wildlife corridors and an old mining claim that threatened a pristine watershed. Maria had accepted a job as the foundation's education director, developing programs to bring urban children to the mountains for environmental learning experiences. Watching her work with kids reminded me why Kevin had fallen in love with her. She had the gift of making every child feel capable of changing the world. Sarah had taken a leave of absence from her Phoenix real estate job to study environmental law, funded by the foundation's educational grants. She'd moved back to Colorado temporarily, staying in the cabin while she attended classes in Denver, and for the first time in years, she looked genuinely happy. David had designed a comprehensive technology platform for the foundation, including systems for tracking land purchases, monitoring environmental impact, and connecting with other conservation organizations worldwide. He'd also met someone, a botanist named Rachel, who shared his passion for data-driven environmental protection. Michael had surprised everyone by taking early retirement from his corporate job to become the foundation's full-time executive director. He and Lisa had sold their oversized house and bought a smaller place closer to the mountains, trading their country club lifestyle for something that felt more like purpose. And Lisa, perhaps most surprisingly of all, had thrown herself into the foundation's work with the intensity of someone who'd finally found her place. She'd become our community outreach coordinator, using her business skills to build partnerships with local governments and environmental groups. More importantly, she'd become the family member who made sure everyone else felt included, the one who organized gatherings and remembered birthdays and created the kind of warmth she'd once felt excluded from. On Christmas morning, we gathered at the cabin for the first time in 5 years. The tree was too big for the living room, the food was abundant but imperfect, and the conversation was loud and chaotic and wonderful. I sat in Richard's old chair by the fireplace, watching my family exchange gifts and argue about board games and plan next year's foundation projects. Kevin and Maria had announced their engagement the night before, and Sarah had been accepted to law school with a full scholarship. David and Rachel were deep in conversation about water rights legislation, while Michael and Lisa worked together in the kitchen with the easy rhythm of people who'd found their way back to each other. "Grandma," Kevin said, settling on the floor beside my chair, "we have something for you." He handed me a small wrapped box, grinning like he had when he was 7 years old and had made me a Christmas ornament out of construction paper and glitter. Inside was a keychain, a tiny silver mountain attached to a keyring that read, "Eleanor Morrison, Foundation Founder." "It's for the Mustang," Maria explained, "and for all the other adventures you're going to have." I held the keychain up to the firelight, watching the little mountains sparkle. "What makes you think I'm going to have adventures?" "Because," Sarah said from the couch, "you're 72 years old and you just learned how to fight back. That's when the real adventures begin." She was right, of course. The past few months had taught me something I'd forgotten during the quiet years of caring for Richard and managing his illness. I'd forgotten that I was Eleanor Morrison, not just Richard's wife or Michael's mother or Kevin's grandmother. I was a woman who'd helped build a business, raised 4 children, and created something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. "Speaking of adventures," David said, looking up from his conversation with Rachel, "we've been thinking about expanding the foundation's scope." "How so?" I asked. "International partnerships. There are conservation efforts in Costa Rica that align with our mission, and Rachel has contacts in New Zealand who are doing incredible work with forest restoration." I looked around the room at these people I'd almost lost to greed and misunderstanding. "You want to take the foundation global?" "We want to take it wherever it can do good," Michael said from the kitchen doorway. Dad always said thinking small was the enemy of thinking right. That night, after everyone had gone to bed in the cabin's various rooms and alcoves, I walked out onto the porch alone. The lake was frozen, reflecting the stars like scattered diamonds. The silence was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. "You did good, old man," I whispered to the darkness. "Better than I thought possible." The wind through the pines sounded almost like an answer. 6 months later, I stood on the same porch, watching my great-grandson take his first steps across the cabin's living room floor. Sarah had brought him. Her adopted son, Marcus, a 2-year-old she'd fallen in love with during her volunteer work with foster children. The adoption papers had been finalized the week before, making her officially the mother she'd always been in her heart. "He's going to love it here," Kevin said, watching Marcus toddle from couch to coffee table with the determination of someone exploring a new world. "They all do," I replied. "That's the point." The foundation was thriving. In its first year, we'd preserved over 3,000 acres of mountain wilderness, funded environmental education programs in 12 school districts, and established partnership agreements with conservation groups in 4 countries. More importantly, we'd given my family a reason to stay connected that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with purpose. Maria and Kevin had married in June, with the ceremony held on the cabin's deck overlooking the lake. The photos from that day showed 5 generations of family and friends, all gathered to celebrate love in the place where love had always felt most at home. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the familiar shades of gold and pink that had marked every important evening of my adult life, I thought about the letter I'd found that morning in my mailbox. It was from the Hendersons, the California couple who'd tried to buy the cabin. They'd written to thank me for forcing them to look elsewhere, because they'd ended up purchasing an even more beautiful property in Montana. "Your no led us to our yes," Mrs. Henderson had written. "Thank you for protecting something that wasn't meant to be ours. Even strangers, it seemed, could benefit from the courage to say no to the wrong thing in order to say yes to the right one." Marcus had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, exhausted by his first day at the cabin. She rocked him gently in the same chair where I'd rocked her 44 years ago, humming the same lullaby my mother had hummed to me. "Mom," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "When the time comes, and I hope it's a very long time from now, when you're ready to pass the foundation leadership to the next generation," she paused, gathering her thoughts, "will you teach me how to be as brave as you were?" I looked at my daughter, This woman who'd survived divorce and disappointment, and the courage to start over at 44, now holding a child she'd chosen to love when biology failed her. She was already braver than she knew. "Sarah," I said gently, "you don't need to learn courage. You just need to remember you already have it." The fire crackled in the grate, sending sparks up the chimney toward stars that had watched over our family for generations. Outside, the lake held the moon like a secret, and the mountains stood guard over everything we'd built and everything we'd saved. I would drive my red Mustang down the mountain road, windows down despite the autumn chill, music loud enough to wake the sleeping forest. I would go home to my garden and my coffee and the grandfather clock that had measured my entire adult life. But night, I sat in the cabin Richard and I had built with our own hands, surrounded by the family we'd created and the legacy we'd chosen to protect. I listened to the voices of children and grandchildren planning adventures and solving problems and dreaming dreams big enough to change the world. I was 73 years old, and my life was just getting started.